Well, I'm super excited to have my friend Mansal Denton back today. And he has solved a problem I've been trying to solve for a very long time. I am very, very sensitive to gluten and grains in general. And I've had a very hard time finding meat that I can eat without having exactly the reaction I get from gluten, because it turns out that if you eat an animal that's been eating gluten or gluten-containing grains, the gluten fraction of the grain gets into the meat. And that's something that I found out the hard way. And Penny and I have spent a lot of time trying to find farmers that don't feed animals grains. It's almost impossible to do. And then after not talking to Mansal for quite a while, he got a hold of me and said, hey, I've got some jerky you might want to try. And it turns out to be, as we're going to get into, Hawaiian axis deer. And it is made beautifully with organ meats as well, which we'll talk about the benefits of. And so I'm not a guy that's been able to eat red meat in a very, very long time. And so the first thing I did is ask my soul, is this safe for me to eat? And I got a big yes. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so I tried Mansal's jerky, and I've tried a lot of different jerkies. I have friends that make jerky meats, and I have looked all over the world. And this was the first time I could eat red meat that did not give me any problems. In fact, quite the opposite, made me feel fantastic. And then I had to fight my kids for it. And I think that's a beautiful thing too. And I don't think there's ever been a need for high quality meats in the world. I don't think there's ever been a greater need than right now, for all the reasons we'll talk about. So if you're ready to learn about how you can actually feed yourself high quality food and be healthy and support nature in a beautiful way, then you're really going to enjoy this podcast. So Mansal, it is fantastic to have you back. And I got to say, thank you again. I think I've already eaten 15 bags of your jerky.
Well, Paul, it's so glad to hear how it's impacted you. And obviously there's a lot of, tangible scientific types of reasons we can talk about, but I'm so glad to hear that you checked in with your soul.
Yeah.
And your soul was a yes. That's something I find a really important part of connection with the food that we eat and our spiritual lives. So I'm glad that you incorporate that. And thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, my pleasure. I don't live any other way. And it's one of the main features of my teachings is learn to connect to the greater part of yourself, the part that's wiser than your ego will ever be. And you can be a lot healthier and live a lot longer, make a lot better decisions on everything. But listen, it's been a few years since we did a podcast together. I was surprised. I was looking through my files, and it's been 3 years. So, I quite often hear about you and your hunts because a lot of my best friends have done sacred hunts with you, and they love having you as a guide. And they always tell me about how deeply spiritual you and what you teach is, and how spiritual the experience of a sacred hunt is. So I'm very grateful for what you do. What have you been up to in the last few years?
Well, I appreciate those reflections from your friends, many of which I know personally, and grateful for their kind words. But as you've suggested, spirituality and authentic spirituality tends to be a very big part of my life. And they have attended what we call sacred hunting experiences. So they came to hunt with me. We utilized a lot of indigenous practices, and these indigenous practices oftentimes do blur the line, as I'm sure your audience knows from your conversations. The Lakota call the Inipi, the sweat lodge, the sacred place. And
Yes.
you go to the sacred place and you cleanse through this ritual before you go on a hunt to take a life. And for many, many years, my spiritual direction was largely guided by indigenous practices. And I had a spiritual teacher for many years, really invested a lot of time into understanding and practicing those. And in fact, in some ways, they actually opened me up to a whole new spiritual tradition. So when you ask what I've been doing for these years, the better part of the last year and a half has been spent in a pretty large deep dive and personal inquiry around Christ and understanding the Christian wisdom tradition. The last time we spoke, I was not in a relationship. I'm now married to an amazing woman who really, with the most kindness and compassion and non-judgmentalism, just showed up in her own spiritual relationship with Christianity, which opened my heart to it. And, I won't go too far down the personal spirituality for your listeners, but I will share that there's actually a really beautiful kind of dovetail between the indigenous spirituality and the more animist practices of indigenous people and the Christian worldview, especially more traditional Christian, like the Orthodox Christianity. And so I spent the better part of 8 months just understanding Christianity, reading, understanding the history as a full-time job. And when I did that, there's really beautiful stories from indigenous in Alaska. So in the western part of Alaska, the Yupik people, the Tlingit people, they interacted with Russians when the Russians, settled parts of Alaska. They became Orthodox Christians, and for them, there's a sense that the animals that they hunted and they killed and they consumed were gods that were giving and sacrificing their life for the indigenous people to survive. And so when these indigenous people heard the story of Christ, the Son of God, coming to earth and dying as a sacrifice, it was it made total sense to a lot of the indigenous people. It was in a way kind of teachings that just went really well together. And so I have found, that to be really true. And what I've really found is how much more the ethics and the morality of the food that I eat is reflected in my life choices with my wife. And so, these are very spiritual kind of conversations, but they've led me to a far more, in some ways, radical kind of approach to the food that I eat, where my wife and I are essentially vegan unless we do it ourselves. We know where it comes from. We know where the animal, how it lived, how it died, and maybe, most importantly for our conversation, was it sovereign? Was it able to live its life in freedom until one moment it was brought back to participate in the cycle of life and death? So, yeah, I know that's a lot to ask. What I've been doing, but that's the deep dive, and I have like so many beautiful quotes that I have, as you saw on even the packaging of some of these products, that I think brings home the messages of connection to our natural world in a really special way.
Well, I think most people aren't aware because they haven't put any time into studying the roots of world religions, but all the world religions originated in shamanism, which was tribal beliefs and practices, and Christianity emerged out of paganism, which contained shamanism. And so, unfortunately, most people's ideas of all the world religions today are sadly antagonistic to shamanism and paganism, and later versions of Christianity went to great length to stamp all that out, but that's what I call corporate Christianity. So I think when you get to the root of all the religions, it goes right back to nature. So I think, hearing about your explorations and the fact that you're connecting to the roots of Christianity brings you right back to the earth and to life and the sacredness of all life. And I think it doesn't matter how we get there. When we get there, we treat life and nature and food as sacred, and none of us could be here without it. And I think that's another thing people forget. Most people don't even know where their food comes from anymore or what they're eating. They just know they don't feel good and that they're sick. In fact, you may not know this, but the number one cause of bankruptcy today worldwide is medical expenses. More people are bankrupt because of the cost of their medical expenses than any other thing, which really shocked me, because I thought when I found that it would be frivolous spending and overuse of credit cards, but it wasn't. It was very high statistical. I can't remember exactly. It was like 60 or 67% of bankruptcies were due to medical expenses, which largely boils down to diet and lifestyle practices, which then boils down to belief systems and a lack of education. So that's my way of saying I'm grateful to hear about your journey.
Yeah, well, just to the medical insurance and debt, it brings up that phrase, pay your doctor or pay the farmer. You choose.
Are you next to a drag strip?
I'm actually right outside of Maxwell Air Force Base. So they're literally the jets. And if you want, we can ask that question again, or I could rephrase that again.
It's okay. Everybody can enjoy the takeoff. It sounded like a drag strip for a minute there. Well, you've started your new company. It's called Real Provisions. Is that the company name? Which I love the title. Name. Beautiful name. And you're providing amazing jerky, and you're going to be offering other products as well, which we'll get into. What inspired you to create this new company, and what products will you be planning to offer in the near future?
Yeah, well, as we talked about with my own spiritual journey, there's one specific line that stands out, and it's Matthew 25:40, and he says, essentially, what you have done to the least of these brothers and sisters, you've done to me. And that insistence on caring for the vulnerable, not just of humans, but the vulnerable of animals, really inspired my wife and I to kind of fully commit to, like I said before, if we're not milking the cows to make the raw milk or the cheese or the butter, or we're not killing the animal ourselves, then we just aren't going to participate in it. And what that led to was us traveling around with a cooler full of meat that broke in tons of glass all over the place multiple times. And so I had both a spiritual reason to commit, but obviously I prefer to eat real food, and so I was trying to do that, but for logistical reasons, it became a bit of a challenge. And I remembered that I have been taking people to Hawaii for years to hunt for these axis deer. And I know many of the hunters. I know how it's done. I know that not only how it's done, but how mandatory it is to conserve the ecology of the islands. And so after a few conversations, I had the idea to create a wild game product that had organs, that was super nutrient dense. And I just wanted to do it for myself, my family, and some of my close friends. If I look back at some of the early emails I sent, and it was just, can I just do a small batch for my friends? And this evolved. I spoke with people, and there were so many of the concerns, some that you share and that I share, of the quality of the food that we're eating in this country, especially some of the toxins and things that have made their way into the food system. I mean, I'm not sure if you saw, but there was a plastic study that found that one of the worst offenders was grass-fed ribeyes from Whole Foods. And
Wow.
so it's incredible to see how that shows up in our food supply. And so we decided we were just going to bring the highest nutrient dense foods and the most ethical foods to the world, to people who really value that kind of thing. And there's for sure a limited quantity. Like, it's not something that the whole world can convert to, unfortunately, but for those who really care about it, it's what I'm passionate about right now.
Well, the thing is, though, Mansal, is that, I've been a therapist for a very, very long time, for 4 decades plus, and I've had countless patients come to me, for example, in the years I owned a physical therapy clinic and worked in them. And a classic example is I worked with a lot of golfers, and golfers are people that I like working with because they're very almost addicted to golf, and they'll do anything to hit the ball further and straighter. And so that's why I wrote my golf biomechanics manual, not because I really was that passionate about golf, but because I was passionate about people that were passionate about improving themselves. And what I found out is that when I was able to teach people, and in this example, golfers, how much better their body would feel and perform, and how much more flexibility they would have and joint stability they would have by eating high quality food, supporting organic farmers, how much it reduced the inflammation in their body, their mental clarity improved. I mean, I've been monitoring and measuring this stuff for a very long time, and it was obvious to these people. And then I got the great joy on many occasions of most of the golfers are fairly well off people, especially in the San Diego area. So a lot of them are actually owners of corporations. In fact, one of my clients who came to me for help with his golf game founded one of the primary telecommunications companies in this country, and had over 65,000 employees, and was one of the people that said, "Paul, I'm feeling so much better, I want to switch my whole company to organic food." And so I've seen this happen over and over again. The point I'm making, Mansal, is that what's so important about what you're doing is not the fact that right now there's not enough of this food available for everybody, but it's the fact that as people get healthy off the kind of food you're providing, their mind clears, their creativity opens, and then they realize what we're doing to the planet by not being conscious of food and where it's coming from and how it's being raised and how the plants and the soil are being treated. And then next thing you know, they're starting an organic farm, or they're putting money into one. And that's how the groundswell happens. So I think that you are probably one of the people that are the seeds of a great tree that's got to grow, because if we don't put more water on the tree of life, we're going to die by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because that's the other tree that keeps getting watered. And knowledge is not knowledge until it's lived. That's the problem. We're so trapped in our heads with ideas of efficiency and cheap food that it's killing everybody.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. It's one of the great quotes that I live by, and we try and have as a motto with Real Provisions, is what we do to nature, we do to ourselves. And the product that we, initially have that you love so much is such an amazing reflection of that. When you look at like the freedom that the animals have when they live in the wild, what that does to their micronutrients. I mean, we've studied this with Utah State University. We've looked at all the breakdowns of different nutrients. We've also looked at the toxins and things like that. So there's, it's hard for people, and myself included sometimes, to wrap my head around kind of the material answers of how that statement is true. But in my heart, I know and I can feel, and we are starting to more and more make clear that what we do to nature, we do to ourselves. And we are unfortunately behaving in such a way with nature that is far, far from what nourishes both the planet and ourselves.
Well, I think most people are not very aware of the fact that current science shows that we turn over every single cell in our body on a yearly basis. It used to be thought it took 7 years, but I've seen more current science that says it's every year. So the way I explain this to people is ask them, where's the water you drink coming from? It sure as hell isn't coming from inside you. It's coming from outside of you. And you're 99.9999 something percent water by molecular count. Where's the food you're eating come from? Outside of you. Where's the air you're breathing come from? Outside of you. So pretty much everything that makes your body comes from outside of you. And that's why I created the acronym ECHO: energy, chemistry, hydration, and organisms. That's what you're made of. And that stands for eco, ecosystem. Whatever you do to the energy, chemistry, water, and organisms outside of yourself, you do to yourself, because that's where you live. You live in the ecosystem. And if you poison your backyard and walk in it, you poison yourself. If you use Roundup and chemicals on food, you eat it, you poison yourself. The problem is as people eat more and more poisoned, nutritionally deficient food, their minds break down and they start relying more and more on technology and shortcuts without looking at the consequences. And the next thing you know, we're right in the situation that we're in, where we think our life is easier because we have AI that can tell us everything and machines that can produce massive amounts of junk food, but we don't realize we're working ourselves right into a hole. So if we're not wise, we're going to have to become robots to exist, because there will be nothing left to eat.
Yeah, we are as a species more and more disembodied.
Yes.
And that has, in my study of, all wisdom traditions, but certainly the Christian wisdom tradition that I'm more attuned to at the moment, that has serious, serious repercussions for what we create in the world. And we have, we have the freedom, we have a freedom as a species, but we also have a responsibility.
Yeah, well, Jesus became disembodied and lived, but it took a tremendous amount of discipline and commitment to God to do it. So I tell people all the time, I don't mind if you're a Christian, I just love to see you practice it.
Yeah.
If you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you've probably heard Paul raving about one of his absolute go-to supplements, P3OM from Bioptimizers. Well, they've given it a new name, Probiotic Breakthrough. It's the same amazing formulation, just with a new name. Here's a chat that Paul and Wayne had about Probiotic Breakthrough before it changed its name.
Bioptimizers makes an amazing product called P3OM, which is a prebiotic product. And it's amazing for not only helping repopulate the gut with friendly bacteria, but as Wade will tell you, it's really, really an amazing product in case you ever feel like you're getting any kind of food poisoning or illness coming on. And Wade's right here with me, and he's the co-founder of Bioptimizers, and he knows more about P3OM than anybody. But I can tell you this, I've had nothing but excellent results and nothing but positive feedback from all my clients and friends that I've turned on to P3OM. So Wade, tell us a little bit about P3OM and why it works so well.
Well, P3M we call it the Navy SEAL of probiotics.
Amen.
Basically, its job is to kick out the bad guys in your body. Food poisoning is one of those things from bad bacteria. What we've done is we've taken an aggressive strain of L. plantarum. We put it into toxic soup, ran a sine wave to keep a few of them alive. And the few survivors, we grow in very specialized medium to make a cultured, patented enzyme that has extraordinary powers. Number one, it survives the intestinal tract.
Yes.
And number two, it is absolutely hunts down pathogens in the body, bacteria, viruses, these type of things. And This is really where the future of probiotics is. It is about developing and culturing and creating super strains of probiotic, very much like the Navy SEALs goes through a training, and these
Yes.
individuals
Mhm.
have extraordinary powers to deal with chaos. And in today's world where we want to improve our immunity and our function and our gut health, P through M is head and shoulders above any probiotic out there.
So my understanding is it can be used daily as a supplement, but it can also be used in larger quantities as a defense measure.
We've tested this literally with over 100 of our friends who have been suffering from various times of food poisoning. And a handful of those guys, when you're in food poisoning, and within 20 to 30 minutes, you complete recovery.
That's awesome. And I've seen it happen myself. Angie has felt bad a number of times, and several of people in the house or family have. And I say, take 10. If that doesn't feel good in an hour, take 20. And you've told me you can't overdose on them, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's the beauty of P through M. You can't take too much. They'll fight off the bad guys, and they'll get your digestion rocking and rolling the way it should.
So if you want to have a healthy gut and you want some defense, carry P3OM with you wherever you go, airplanes, cars, business meetings, hotels, conferences, and you've got your Navy SEALs in the bottle, and they're ready for you anytime.
Spirit Gym with Paul Chek listeners now get 15% off their purchase of Probiotic Breakthrough by going to bioptimizers.com/Spirit Gym and use the code PAUL15 at checkout. You can choose from 3 different sizes, and in addition, Bioptimizers always have special bonus gifts and additional savings when you get multiple bottles. So head to bioptimizers.com/Spirit Gym and check out Probiotic Breakthrough with the code PAUL15 for 15% off.
There's a great quote from Saint Maximus the Confessor. So this was somebody early in early church history, and he had his hand cut off, his tongue removed for his beliefs, but he stood fast to them. And he says, theology without practice is the theology of demons.
Yeah.
It's
Yes,
basically, if you just think about it and you have all these thoughts about how the world should be, but you don't live in the way that you know you should, loving your neighbor, treating all of God's creation with awe, wonder, and respect, then you're out of alignment.
Well, you know you're out of alignment when you don't know what a male or a female is anymore. I mean, how much far down the rabbit hole can you get? So here we are, which is just highlighting the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast and share what you're doing, because I think it's critical. And I hope that this podcast is inspiration for many to do it in their own ways, whether it be free range farming or, bringing in wild fish, or organic and biodynamic and, high quality farming that's earth conscious and takes care of the soil. Fortunately, many of my students have gone out and started farms and healthy food companies. And, I've been blessed to watch what happens when people actually have the experience of getting healthy and realizing that it's very hard to be healthy because there's just so little to support health. And as you know, Rockefeller's done a great job of making it illegal to be healthy, for God's sakes. I mean, COVID was just a perfect example of everything that you would ever use to get healthy got taken off the shelves and disappeared, and in some cases became illegal. So I think it's just time for the great wake up. I don't know, it pains my heart to no end to have the type of spiritual connection I do to nature spirits and the earth, and to watch what humanity is doing to the planet and therefore to each other as well, because those two behaviors are the same, right? And the problem with scientific materialism is it takes the spirit and the soul out of everything. So everything just becomes an object for purchase or a commodity to own. And now we've got Bill Gates and globalists cataloging the entire planet with satellites and AI so they can parcel it off and sell it. I mean, this is a serious psychological disease. But when you look at the studies for example, George Watson's book, Nutrition in Your Mind, and many others I have in my library, you can see from studies in prisons, for example, they go and they make small improvements in their nutrition, such as a whole food vitamin, and the violence goes down and all sorts of positive changes happen. But even though there's these studies out there, there's very, very little awareness of it. And you can see how dangerous things have gotten by the fact that I've read several articles now about the coup they're trying to create against RFK, because he even wants to just clean up the additives and preservatives and dyes in foods. And so the whole corporate enterprise is trying to figure out how to get rid of RFK, because his concern is the health of people and the health of our nation. So in a nutshell, what you're starting is something that we've all got to become aware of.
Yeah, thank you. And when you mention RFK, it brings up, I wrote an essay called Maha is Bound for Failure. Make America Healthy Again is bound for failure. And it definitely took some people aback. But my main point was very important aspect of the Bible where it specifically addresses you cannot serve both mammon and God, which translates to you cannot serve money and God at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And RFK has such an uphill battle because I don't think there are CEOs and VPs of these companies that want to poison their children, but we have as a society so oriented ourselves towards wealth and resources and building for ourselves individually. We've lost sight of all of the beings that are no longer in harmony, including the people that are down in Guatemala, sending up their best bananas so that Americans can have it at all times instead of seasonally, or, all these other small things that we've just kind of overlooked a little bit. And so that's why I do think that the way in which we eat is a spiritual act. It is a spiritual decision. It's maybe one of the most spiritual acts that we can commit to on a daily basis, because it is the nourishment that creates who we are and how we live in this world. And if we're not fueled by things that are made with a conscious choice, then we are, supporting the spiritual degradation of our species and the world.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I don't know if you've ever come across this book. It's not a real common book, but it's a very powerful book. It's called Farmers of 40 Centuries by Professor F.H. King.
Never heard of it. Would love to read it.
Well, it'll blow your mind. It was written in 1910, if I remember right. I've got a big collection of rare books that I travel around the world looking for all the time. And so I have a lot of very unique literature in my library. But F.H. King was a professor of agriculture, and he worked for the United States Department of Agriculture. And in the early 1900s, the United States government had a big question mark that they needed F.H. King to answer. And that is, how in the world can Japan, China, and Korea feed that many people on such a small amount of land? If I remember right, only 14% of China's land is arable, but they have one of the largest populations in the world. So they tasked Professor King with going to these countries and investigating their farming systems. And at that time, Professor King did a very comprehensive evaluation of the farming systems in these countries. He found, for example, that the average Chinese farmer was producing more food on 1 2/3 of an acre than an American farming family could produce on 40 acres. Most American farming families at that time felt that 40 acres was barely enough to feed their family. He showed that the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese farmers were so far advanced beyond American farmers, and they were farming organically. They were collecting their own poop. It was called midnight soil. They had places in each village where everybody would put their poop, which they would then compost and put back into the soil. He gives a correlate of what a comparison would be by looking at a Chinese farmer, a typical Chinese, Korean, or Japanese farmer, what they could produce on 1 2/3 of an acre. And he multiplied that out to 40 acres and actually gives you the numbers of the amount of pigs and chickens and crops they could produce. And it was mind-blowing. And in the book, he's already making statements that it is a disappointment to him to see how much money we're spending on military budgets to build warships, etc., when we should be putting this money back into the soil and into our infrastructure and into our farming. And he stated then that the complaints were that we have to, the gestalt amongst the American farming community and agriculture community was we have to become more industrialized because we can't produce enough food to feed the growing population. And based on his analysis, he said farming organically, based on what he learned from the Chinese, Japanese, and Koreans, that the earth had a carrying capacity of, with organic farming, of between, if I remember right, 11 and 14 billion people before we ran into trouble. Yet we've got people like Bill Gates and others saying that we're already there and we've maxed it out. And this is the very reason the industrial agricultural movement has been pushing for more chemicals and more, monocropping. And another book of mine showed something quite shocking. The average American farming family, when you look at farming families, destroys beyond use 7,000 acres of farmland per family, from over-tilling and the use of chemicals, etc. Another book in my library shows it by the year 1961, the year I was born, we had already destroyed over 60% of the topsoil in the United States from commercial farming. So the point that I'm making, if it's not crystal clear, the United States government has known the truth for a very long time. And this is what happens when money becomes the driver, not the truth. And what you're doing and what you're inspiring is exactly what I was talking about with the golfers and the people, is that if we all don't start putting money in the hands of regenerative farmers and biodynamic and organic and people like Korean farmers and the various natural systems that are avoiding the use of chemicals unless extremely necessary, which is rare, which is very well, by the way, documented in an excellent book called Science in Agriculture by Arden B. Anderson, who's not only got a PhD in soil science, but he's an MD, and he has a phenomenal weave of the science and the history of farming and shows exactly how the entire university system got hijacked by chemical corporations and how their belief system been made to think that you can't farm without using chemicals. And he unveils the dragon beautifully in the book Science in Agriculture.
Yeah, it's, as you're talking about this, I'm just thinking about how this impacts people on a day-to-day basis. And I was speaking to a farmer who he was saying when he was making jerky with beef, and he was saying that for many, many years, he would buy specific cuts, $2 to $3 per pound of beef, and now he's paying $6 to $8 per pound. And the costs are going up because you can't treat nature as an infinite system and expect it to behave in a way that provides ever more increasing yields. And there's so many repercussions that come with isolating, manipulating, and separating everything within, not only within nature, but in agriculture as the industrial, food system does. And it obviously has an impact on humans as it's the food that we eat. And there's a very, very clear difference between a wild animal and even the best domesticated animals.
Yes, and I think one of the things that is often overlooked is the fact that diversity is stability. Nature is extremely diverse. It has redundant backup system after backup system after backup system. You look at just how adaptive fungi are, for example, and it's just mind-boggling, the chemistry they can do and how important they are to the fabric of the planet, the entire ecosystem. And whenever you start monocropping, you basically are destroying the diversity of nature. And when you start putting chemicals on the ground, you're wiping out an incredible food web that has built itself over, 4 billion years on this planet. And that's, we're smart enough to build rockets and satellites, but we're not smart enough to see the obvious. And I think one of the things that breaks my heart is how much money we spend on disease and defense at the expense of taking care of the infrastructure that gives us all the chance to live and to share. And I think one of the problems is that the globalists have gotten people so pitted against each other over ideas of religion and skin color and race and belief system. But when we look at what it is that binds us together, we all are breathing the same air. We're right now, we're breathing air that was exhaled in China yesterday. We're all drinking water that moves around the world in the hydrological cycle. We all need food. In other words, the commonalities that we share, that we need to exist, to live, and that our kids need to live, are far greater of a binding factor that we should all be getting together to support and to support each other in supporting that. It shouldn't matter what religion you practice or what clothes you wear or hairstyle you wear or any of that. We should all be circling the globe and holding hands to honor, worship, love, respect, and protect the very life that gives us life. And we should be managing the force of death with great reverence and respect, as opposed to just traumatizing, killing, and destroying in the name of cheaper food or whatever gimmick is going on, or in the name of more money. And the amount of trickery and connivery in the food system is right there with the medical system and the defense system.
If you have listened to even one episode of Paul's podcast before, then you will know that he is passionate, and some would say even fanatical, about the quality of the food he eats and where it is sourced from. That is why the Chek household only eats pasture-raised meat, wild-caught fish, and organic produce. And that is why we subscribe to Wild Pasture's meat delivery service. Each month, Wild Pastures delivers a box of meat that has been raised by family farmers in the USA using regenerative farming practices. 100% grass-fed and finished beef, pasture-raised chicken, and pasture-raised pork, as well as wild-caught seafood. You can customize the selection in your box, add on extra when you know you will be feeding more people, or change your options each and every month. You might be thinking that this will be too expensive for you, but Wild Pasture's mission is to offer the highest quality meat at the lowest prices because they want to transform the meat industry. And that means that more people need to be able to choose meat that is raised right. Their pasture-raised animals are part of a natural ecosystem. Their farmers use rotational grazing, practices that mimic nature, and so do not need to use synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, hormones, or antibiotics. This beautiful process doesn't require the external resources, such as massive amounts of GMO grain, required with environmentally depleting conventional methods. And best of all, the meat and fish taste amazing. And for Paul's listeners, Wild Pastures are offering you 20% off your subscription for life, $15 off your first order, and free shipping. Seriously, you can't find a better deal for top quality pasture-raised meat. Go to wildpastures.com/Paul Chek. You don't need a promo code. Just visit wildpastures.com/Paul Chek and start choosing the goodies you will have delivered to you in your first box.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to me. And when you look at a question, which I'm sure you've fielded many times before, around eating meat, the ethics of eating meat, it's you can almost see the consciousness, not of all for sure, but if you look, let's say, on one side of the equation, the vegans or vegetarians, plenty of people who are very thoughtful, very conscientious, but in many cases, there's almost a disposition to just close their eyes and let's sweep under the rug what industrial agriculture does to the planet, for example, or if I eat something, what are the downstream effects? And then on the other side of the spectrum, the animal, factory farming industry is not just sweeping it under the rug; it's just numbing oneself to the pain and suffering that's caused. And so it is, of course, I'm very biased, but I have made, for the last decade or so, my career focused on how can we walk the line of participating. Yes, I will participate in the cycle of life and death and the nutrition that is inherent for a human that is involved there, but with respect, with reverence, even with a certain amount of connection to the pain that comes up by being involved. And you and I have talked, off camera about how you grew up and, raising the animals and then killing them and what that does, emotionally. And I'll tell you, I cannot drive on a highway without seeing a raccoon or a deer or a possum that's been hit by a vehicle. That brings me a deep, deep sadness. And so, once there's a certain level of courage it takes to just have an open heart for all of these creatures that we collectively consume as a species. And my invitation, however it is that, the audience chooses to go about it, is to lean into that, be open to that way of living. It's incredibly rewarding in the same way that opening our hearts to another human being comes with hurt and challenges, but is the most loving and intimate way to walk through this world.
Well, love always comes with responsibility. That's no matter which direction you go. There's a great book called The Great Grain-Based Fallacy by Jane Buxton. I've had her on the podcast, and she does a very good job of showing how the whole vegan movement has largely been funded by the grain industry to get people away from meat and to eat more grains. She has a lot on how investigations into the children of vegans have abnormal brain growth and development, nervous system challenges, hormonal challenges. In other words, kids cannot grow effectively on plants only, with rare exceptions. Statistically and factually, only 4 to 6% of all the food grown in the world is organic, truly organic, 4 to 6%. So one of the concerns I have with the vegans is that they're touting this vegan diet, but most of them are eating commercially raised food. And when you start looking into the research on what happens to the animals that are being contacted by those chemicals and the rates of disease amongst them, how bird traffic drops, and how the entire diversity of the animal species becomes destroyed due to the chemicals, we see that there's another huge fallacy, because the whole point of the vegan movement is not to kill, yet it's killing wildly. And the other thing is that a lot of these people, unfortunately, are very uneducated. I've studied soil science quite extensively. If you study soil science, you'll find that 85% of all plants in nature are mycorrhiza-formers. What a mycorrhiza-former is the mycorrhiza are the filaments of the fungi, as you're probably familiar with. But because plants cannot dissolve rocks into bioavailable minerals, the mycorrhiza dissolve the rocks. So the fungi dissolve the rocks and they feed the liquid minerals to the plants. They send filaments right through the tips of the roots. And in trade, the plant gives them the sugars in the plant because that's their preferred food. Now, why that's important is because, and you can see all the way back into 1946, I believe it was, Lady Eve Balfour wrote her book, The Hawley Experiment, and showed pictures all the way back then. And then you can study Elaine Ingham's course on soil science. You can look at, there's plenty of these images available today that are more modern. But what's wild is they show conclusively that the mycorrhiza set traps for the parasites that eat different plants, and they catch them, and the mycorrhiza will eat the insects from the inside out and feed them to the plants. They literally feed the insects to the plants. Now, insects, ladies and gentlemen, are animals. That's a fact. Go study taxonomy. So the point I'm making is 85% of all the plants the vegans are eating are meat-eating plants. They actually eat the parasites that try to kill them, and the mycorrhiza do that for them as a service and feed it right to them through the root system. So we've got a very confused profit-driven ideology based on grain-based living, which most people have no idea how they got these ideas planted in their head. And so it really boils down to what we started with, is eating is sacred, and we shouldn't kill what we're not going to eat, and we shouldn't live without being respectful to the elements and to the resources and to the beauty and the harmony and the integrity of nature. We all have to clean, feed, nurture, and protect. And we need to clean our environment of toxins. We need to feed the environment. And that's what an organic farmer or a biodynamic farmer does, is they know how to make compost and use fertilizers and feed the microorganism population, because it turns out that the littlest creatures in the soil have the biggest impact on our health. Yet because we walk on them and don't see them, we're completely unconscious of the fact. And one of the ways I make this point to vegans and vegetarians is I say, look, do you have an animal, a pet, a cat, or a dog that you love? They almost always say yes. And I say, well, if I shrunk that animal or pet down to the size of a microorganism and you stepped on it and killed it, would it make you sad? Well, of course they say yes. I said, well, you're doing it everywhere you go. If you counted the number of organisms you kill with every breath that are in the air, if you take a drop of water and put it under a microscope and look at how many living organisms there is in healthy water, you'd realize that we're constantly killing and that life has to eat life. There's no way life can survive. The question is, are you taking good enough care of yourself with the very diet that you eat that you're not killing the one animal that can make positive choices to make the world a better place for all living beings? Because whatever diet you're living, if it's damaging the animal body that you have and the vegetable body that's within it, called the organ and gland systems, all which function on the principles of the vegetable kingdom. That's why when people used to have severe brain injuries, they were called vegetables, because the nervous system and the organs run on the principles of vegetation. If you're eating and living in a way that's damaging your own body, then the whole vegan story about not harming animals just got to go right out the window, because it becomes nonsensical at that point. And the fact is that most people have parents that came from somewhere in the world where the ground freezes in the winter and plants don't grow in ice. So most of us have to eat meat to keep our genetic requirements supplied so that we can have a healthy body. And so really you see there's a circle of life, and it's sacred. And that's what I love about what you do.
Yeah, thank you. It reminds me, when you're talking about the locations and the frozen ground, of a hunt that I led for sacred hunting earlier this year. And it was for a documentary, and I had a Jain. If you're,
I know what a Jain is. It's a branch of Hinduism, and I know exactly. I've studied it. I know all about it. So go ahead.
Yeah, so he was very closely identified with his Jain roots. It's a spiritual tradition where they focus on nonviolence for all beings.
They don't even want to lay on beds because they're afraid to kill the bed bugs. And they wear masks so they won't breathe them in.
Right. So they're the most extreme version of
vegan,
trying to, be mindful of not taking life of any kind. And juxtaposed with him was Henry Cejudo, who is a world champion UFC fighter, world wrestling boxer, or wrestler rather. And I mean, it was such a beautiful juxtaposition. That's why it was put together
it's
for
the
the
yin and the
documentary.
yang.
Yep. And they both were incredible human beings, and it was so great to get to see them learn from each other and interact. But I told the Jain during ceremony, I said, what a gift that you come from India. Your ancestors come from India, because the choice to be a Jain in the Arctic would be a death sentence.
Yes, it would.
And it very much is something that we all have to be mindful of. Certainly there are places in the world where it's more possible in tropical climates, and reality for most of our species. And it, as with most indigenous wisdom, is more about how than the what. So it's not necessarily whether or not you consume life or not, it's how you do it. And, I think, of course, again, I'm very biased, and I seek to the best of my ability to avoid pridefulness. However, what I find with the lifestyle that my wife and I have is, when we make a certain type of commitment around, we're only going to eat these kinds of foods, or especially really leaning into the wild caught fish, the wild hunted animals, we're forcing ourselves into a way of intentional living that becomes a spiritual action on a daily basis. Because people have you met, known, where you hear from them that they're spiritual, but what does that mean? How do you show up on a day-to-day basis? What are the ways, the habits, the practices that you use that reflect your spirituality? And I don't just mean, praying or meditating, as great as those are. How do you live your life in such a way that is reflective of your spiritual beliefs? And I hope that I can bring this to more people, where they can, even in small ways, have a real firm practice of being connected to the things that they are committed to and believe in.
Well, one of my favorite definitions of spirituality, because I've read many books on what spirituality really is, and it's a very confusing topic. There's many books on it and many different ideas, but the one that sits most beautifully in my heart is that spirituality in practice is the progressive connection to a larger whole. So as you grow spiritually, you realize, for example, that you are your environment, that you are the water, that you are the earth, you are the sunlight, the fire, you are the air, which goes all the way back to Aristotelian, alchemy and the elemental system. But the function of spirituality is to grow in consciousness and to become aware of what it is that your life is about and what is allowing you to live and what's living in and through you. One of my practices is I don't believe that the soul can die. In Hinduism, they say that Atman is Brahman and Brahman is Atman, which means Atman is soul and Brahman is God. It means God is soul and soul is God. So everything that's alive has a soul. Steiner says anything with an inside and an outside has a soul, all the way down to an atom. And the soul is the experience of being. The spirit is what's animating it. So when we look at the fact that our sense of who we are grows as our conscious awareness grows of what it is that sustains us and support us, I define reality as two things. Reality is what's happening right now, and reality is everything that supports your ability to live. So if you're living in ways that do not support your ability to live, you're out of touch with reality. And to practice a spiritual life is to live with reverence and love and respect for all life and support it to the best of your ability. And when you look at Weston A. Price's excellent book, which I think is probably the most important nutrition book in the world, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, in the 30s, Weston Price traveled the world. I believe he started doing that in 1938 and analyzed the diets and the health of tribal societies all over the world. Have you seen his book at all?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So you see in there, he did a comprehensive analysis of the food. He looked at their dental structures. He looked at their overall health. And he was specifically trying to find a healthy vegetarian tribe, and he could not do it. He found that the number one limiting factor on how much meat was eaten anywhere in the world was how much meat was available. And that where there was vegetarian tribes, it was almost always out of necessity. But he said clearly that whenever he found a vegetarian tribe, he could find a meat-eating tribe nearby and demonstrated that they were healthier beyond a shadow of a doubt. So the key point was that they adapted to their environment. Then you've got Byron Robinson, MD, who also in the early 1900s, did comprehensive analysis of human beings, and he did dissections and looked at the length of the entron, which is the digestive tube from mouth to anus. And he had the question is, what's the difference in the length of the digestive tract in people that come from different regions of the world? And could he identify any of these things objectively? And he found that the length of the entron from mouth to anus was as short as 22 feet in cultures that ate predominantly meat, but as long as 41 feet in regions of the world where people had to live largely on plant-based diets. Now, we got to remember, a cow has 5 stomachs. So they have a fermentation system for bringing protein out of grass, which is very, very hard to do. Chimpanzees and apes have different enzymes profiles than we do, so they can break down cellulose. But what Byron Robinson, MD, showed was that we do adapt to the environment, and that our entire digestive system adapts to make it easier for us to get protein out of plant-based foods if we're coming from a lineage of people that have lived in these regions long enough that the body can adapt. I could go on and on and on with studies like this, but the reality of it is that we've got university systems that are not teaching students what's important about life. They're not teaching people the truth about life. In fact, they're still teaching people that the pyramids were built by rolling 100-ton blocks of stone up wooden rollers 440 feet in the air, and people get master's degrees for believing such silliness. So the reality of it is the question mark we all have to face is, how far down the rabbit hole of lies, trickery, and bullshit are we going to go before we start protecting the planet, the resources, and each other from people that I'd like to say are not educated, but Professor King's book shows that they do know. The government's known this for a very long time. In fact, if you look at the book Revolution at the Table by Harvey Levenstein, he talks about how, I believe it was either the First or the Second World War, because they didn't want to give meat to people, they started bread lines. And during that time, they had to kill over 1 billion animals, and they were dumping them in rivers because there was an excess of beef and an excess of animals on farms because there was not enough money for people to buy it, and the government refused to subsidize people with meat. So they had bread lines. But while they were doing this, they were actually killing animals and dumping them in rivers. And he's got 2 books, Revolution at the Table, and then The Paradox of Plenty. Both of those books are mind-blowing reads, and he shows you the whole history of the corporate takeover of the food system and how people have been just taught to believe a lot of crap. And it just makes me sad that most people don't have a real education. This is what I've been teaching students in my institute for a very, very long time. Because if you don't understand what's really going on, you don't understand how nature works, then people like me and you just sound like hippie crackpots. But when you really get down to it, to the spiritual reality of it, and you get down to the factuality of it, this is a game that we've got to stop. And we're not going to stop it until we start eating well, because we don't have the creativity and we don't have the life force in us to make the changes we need to make when we're sick people. And when you're sick, you can only think about yourself. That's well proven in psychological studies. And you can look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The more unhealthy a person gets, the more unable they are to be creative and productive in the world, and the more they end up becoming dependent on the very people that they call family. And the next thing you know, you reach the point where we are right now, where you've got so many sick people in the world that their survival instincts direct their consciousness inward into survival only. And when you're in a survival mode, you can't really get involved in the bigger issues of the world because you don't have the energy and resources. And if you start getting involved in spending your energy on saving the soil or saving the waterways, et cetera, then you're expending life force energy that you need to keep yourself alive and heal. So the sad reality of it is, if you keep people sick enough, they're easy to control and they're easy to brainwash because they don't have enough energy to do creative and critical thinking.
Millions of people are carrying parasites, and most don't even know it. In fact, the chances are good that you have one or more parasites inside you right now, leeching off your nutrients and strength. But before you get all freaked out about it, here is some good news. Organifi's Parasite Cleanse Kit contains a unique and specialized blend of carefully chosen natural elements that help locate, kill, and remove unwanted guests and pests from the body. Like a magnet finding iron in the sand, these ingredients adhere to the toxins and parasites and pull them out of hiding, ultimately removing them from your body. This two-step combination of 100% natural ingredients includes the Parasite Cleanse capsules and the Bind and Restore tincture, creating an easy-to-use cleanse that is perfect to help get rid of your unwanted guests. Now is a great time to try Organifi's Parasite Cleanse Kit and save 20%. Go to Organifi.com/Chek20 and use the promo code Chek20. That's Organifi.com/CHEK20 and use the code Chek20 for a 20% discount.
Yeah, and critical thinking as it pertains to our food and our food system, and not just food and food system, but if you extrapolate out, the assault on all of our faculties is so relentless and everywhere. And I am just as challenged by it as anyone, whether it be social media or, the news, not necessarily things that I watch, but, maybe articles or what have you. There are so many assaults on our well-being and not always, not necessarily intended to be malicious, but again, with this profit motive, it has really warped the world in which we live. And, I could philosophize and talk about some of the larger problems that I see with society. But of course, my favorite philosophers and activists are people who do something about one thing or one area that they're really passionate about. And food is the one that resonates the most with me. I grew up with my mother. She's Indian. And I remember she would tell me stories about Christians that would come to India who would try to convert her as a Hindu. And she would her family basically just wouldn't entertain their conversion attempts, but would invite them over for dinner. And they would have a meal of Indian food. They would feed these, evangelists. And And there's something about feeding other people and sharing that love that has been, passed down for me with my mother. And as the world faces all these challenges, I have to regularly come back to what's mine to do, what's mine to give back, what's the love that I hope to give to these people. And, when it comes to the food that we eat, the animals in particular, I have led for many years experiences where people understand emotionally and viscerally what is it like to pull the trigger and kill an animal. And I do think that's really important, because you can't really know with only knowledge and gnosis. True understanding is also embodied. And so when you participate in that, you know at a deeper level. But I also realize that there are some incredible mothers out there, people who have too many kids to travel to Hawaii, too many responsibilities. And that's another reason why I wanted to bring the wild story and ethos to people's door directly, so to speak, because I too want to start a family and can't be leading experiences all over the world all the time, and I want to make that more readily available way.
Well, that leads right into my next question. Why don't you tell us about the situation with the deer in Hawaii and how that ties into what your company does and offers? I think that's an important part of the story. That was one of my concerns that I expressed to you right off the bat. And, as you explained to me what was going on, and it took away my angst. And I will also say we have a farm here. I was raised on a farm, as you know, and we started our farm here for not only to have food in case of an emergency, because COVID certainly made it very clear to us that an emergency of that type could come anytime. So we put a lot of time, effort, and money into creating a sustainable property with greenhouse and a pond stocked with fish and goats. And Angie makes cheese and milks the goats and makes soap and all sorts of stuff. And we've got a couple of pigs and a bunch of chickens. And so for me, I know how important it was in my life that just as your mother's relationship with food has seeded your soul's journey and helped you create meaning around food, I look back at my life and I know for a fact that I couldn't have been the athlete that I was without the underpinning of healthy food, and I wouldn't have a sense of awareness of the cycle of life without having been raised on a farm. And like I shared with you, I would be caring for the pigs and petting them and become friends with them and riding them when I was a little kid. I used to love getting on the big 450-pound sows and boars, and they would let me ride them. And I would be I really had a loving friendship. And the next thing you know, it was slaughter time and I was eating my friends, and it used to be very emotionally challenging for me, but that's how I learned about the cycle of life. And that's how I learned how sacred life is and how important it is to give animals a beautiful life. And that's what I want from my children, because I think, right now we've got so many kids that are being raised on tablets and computers that they haven't got a clue what the soil is or where their food comes from. And a lot of them think that money just comes out of a hole in the wall at the shopping mall. They don't really even know where that comes from. And I know that for the future, if we don't have an upswelling of children that are connected to the earth, it's going to be very, very easy for people to get lost in the technocratic, scientific, materialistic, transhumanistic fallacy, which I think is, something that's extremely dangerous. And if most people even just looked at the effects of Wi-Fi on their body and then started asking themselves what's going to happen when you start putting computer chips in your head, they would wise up. But that's just me saying, tell us about the situation in Hawaii and why that's working so well as a natural counterbalance for you to be able to produce this amazing food for us without throwing nature out of balance and just becoming another force of death.
Yeah. When I first learned about this, I was incredibly surprised and wanted to do something about it. And now I've finally found a way to more readily support the ecology of Hawaii. But the story goes back to the late 19th century. So I think it was in the 1860s. The first 13 or 14 axis deer were gifted to the king of Hawaii. So axis deer are native to India. They're called the chital in India, and beautiful deer, but they never were intended to have evolved on the Hawaiian Islands. So they were gifted in the 19th century and they proliferated. And if you can believe it, 150 years later, there are now hundreds of thousands, probably close to 200,000 of these deer. And it's a challenge. There's a few islands, 3 in particular, where the majority of these deer are currently located. And these populations, they have no natural predators. So there's no mountain lion, no bear, no any predator that lives on these islands that will hunt the animals. And that has major ecological repercussions because the animals, axis deer, are prolific. They are constantly breeding, so they're constantly having babies. They are, consuming the foliage that's on the Hawaiian Islands, which is, as anybody who knows ecology knows, are very sensitive. Island ecologies are quite sensitive. They're very unique and rare because of their isolation from other, mainlands. So all kinds of species of plants that are being overly consumed by all these herbivores that are not native to the environment. And that obviously creates downstream effects. So then you have soil erosion, right? So you have whole areas that are not quite desertified, but they're becoming less lush. There's less moisture. There's more problems. And so from an ecological perspective, there's a reason to control the populations, to hunt them. And I really, really am mindful. I don't like to demonize these creatures because we brought them. They didn't ask to be brought, and they're just doing what
nature does.
God, created them to do, which is proliferate. And so I don't use the word invasive, but they do create this damage. And I think most importantly for people who kind of struggle with killing an animal for the sake of nature, let's say, in many cases, this is actually in the benefit of the herd, because if you have a herd that is enormous, they're at the carrying capacity. That means the plants can no longer really sustain them. Then you have an event like a drought where there's not the water, you will see these deer suffering. And I remember the last time I visited, I was talking to one of the hunters, and he said that the last drought they had, there was a thistle that is something the deer usually don't eat, but they were so desperate. They started eating this thistle, and it's like has this kind of a white substance, sticky substance that comes out of it. And so these deer were eating that, and it was destroying them from the inside out. Like they could not absorb food. They stopped eating. He said he could feel there were many animals that would come up to him, walk up to him, usually petrified of humans, and would offer themselves, please just kill me, because of how much they were suffering. And he said they killed thousands of deer and weren't able to really harvest the meat just in order to control the population and end their suffering. And so when I created Real Provisions and we had the idea to bring this axis deer to market, it really felt like this is for the good of all. This is for our good as a human. So highest nutrient density that we could possibly have, no toxins that we're, feeding our children and our families. but also good for the land. Hawaii appreciates the management of these animals. In fact, a lot of the governments try and promote how can we, hunt more, utilize more of these animals, because every day I'm, seeing on social media that people their vehicle hit a car, or an animal hit a car, and all these types of challenges of living with such a high population. So good for the land, good for us, and good for the animals when they're controlled and they're managed, so that, the ones that are living there have more food to eat and more freedom. And so ultimately, that's where we started, because that is something that I've been trying to work on for years now. I've taken groups over to Hawaii for the last 5 years, and we've taken groups like Ben Greenfield and his kids have been out there to hunt deer, and there's dozens and dozens of people, but individuals, we really have a hard time making any kind of real impact. And it's not to say that my whole goal is to make an impact per se, but I want to bring the most nutrient dense, the highest standard of ethics and nutrition to the world. And this was the starting place in Hawaii. But the more that I dug into it, the more that I realized there are all different types of stories like this. And there are fish, Asian carp, silver carp. These are fish that are in the Midwest. So if you look in the Mississippi River Basin, in the Illinois River Basin, these fish are sometimes up to 90% of all of the biomass that are in these rivers. So if you imagine, these rivers are supposed to be, just as you said before, diverse with different fish. They're all kind of feeding each other in the ecosystem. Well, this specific fish has completely dominated, and they're overpowering any other fish in the Midwest waterways. And so that's something that we're exploring and studying right now. Shad fish. Here's another story of the indigenous people, so native people to the states of Oregon and Washington. They're salmon consuming people, right?
Yep.
And we introduced a fish called shad into these waterways, and they the indigenous people catch shad instead of salmon. They outcompete the salmon, and so they're losing their food source, they're losing their traditions because of these non-native species. And so again, really mindful not to make any of these species wrong or demonize them in any way, but they're wild, which means highest nutrient density for us. It also means the most sovereignty and freedom for these animals. They live their entire life free until the moment they die. And it also means that when we consume, when we participate in the cycle of life and death, unlike the stories of factory farming, we are actually feeding a beautiful relationship to the earth. So we feed ourselves in a beautiful way. We feed the ecosystem in a beautiful way. And that is truly, for the good of all.
We live in a world where stress is constant and distractions are endless. If you're like many of my clients juggling family, career, training, and spiritual practice, you've probably felt the toll it takes on your clarity and vitality. You may even be someone that can't get through the day without drinking coffee, even when it's not making you feel better anymore. That's why I'm excited to share something that's become part of my daily ritual, Nandaka by Peak. Nandaka means the sword of wisdom. It isn't your typical energy booster or coffee substitute. Nandaka is a sacred blend of organically grown adaptogenic and nootropic botanicals designed not to mask your fatigue, but to nourish your nervous system, feed your brain, and support deep, sustainable energy from the inside out. That's what true vitality is all about. Unlike most mushroom products that are stuffed with mycelium grown on grain, Nandaka is made from 100% fruiting bodies. That's where the medicine lives. You get the full spectrum of benefits of lion mane for mental clarity and nerve regeneration, reishi and chaga for modulating stress and inflammation, and ceremonial cacao rich in anandamide, the bliss molecule, to uplift your mood and calm your system. Even the cacao butter serves a higher purpose, acting as a delivery mechanism to carry these nutrients deep into your brain. When I take Nandaka before podcasting, teaching, writing, or conducting a therapy session, I notice something profound. The energy is steady, the focus is clean, and my creativity flows without resistance. It supports the body, the mind, and the soul all at once. And here's the truth. If your brain and nervous system are overstimulated and undernourished, you'll always be inviting burnout. That's why I don't treat the symptoms. I go to the source. And Nandaka aligns with that philosophy. I'm truly impressed with Nandaka, and that's why I'm excited to share this powerful, effective support and nourishment to help you stay vital throughout each day, to bring you many of the core nutrients most everybody's brain, nervous system, and body needs today. Currently, there are over 18,000 five-star reviews on Peak's amazing products, and Nandaka is trusted by some of the top minds in wellness for a reason, including me. These products actually work. Tune in, reconnect, nourish your core. Try Nandaka and feel the shift. Nandaka is a powerful ally, and right now you can get 20% off for life, plus a free starter kit with your first order and a rechargeable frother and helpful glass beaker for mixing your Nandaka exclusively at peaklife.com/Paul Chek. Once again, that's PIQUELIFE.com/PAULCHEK. peaklife.com/Paul Chek for 20% off for life plus a free starter kit with your first order. Well, not only that, as you reduce these populations of the fish or the deer, nature actually has a chance for the other species to rebalance themselves. So many people might just focus on the killing of or the eating of, but not realizing that nature will, then other species can grow. So you bring the diversity back, which brings the stability back. You reminded me, I once saw a presentation by David Suzuki, who's very famous in Canada. Are you familiar with David Suzuki?
Nope.
Oh, you got to look up David Suzuki. He had a TV show in Canada for all the time when I was a kid. He's like I can't remember if he's a biologist. I think he's a biologist. He's a genius of a man. I don't know if he's still alive, but he did a lot of great stuff. But he he did an analysis because he was concerned about genetically modified animals, and he did an analysis of what happens when you genetically modify salmon. So he used a computer analysis, and he showed that genetically modified salmon, the males are much bigger than normal males in a natural salmon population, but he showed that the females are attracted biologically to the size of a male, and that's what attracts them. And that because these genetically modified salmon, the males were much bigger, it was causing preferential breeding. So the females were now breeding with genetically modified males, which is meaning they're producing unnatural offspring. And he showed that in something like 400 cycles of reproduction, it could wipe the entire salmon population out because it throws the whole species completely out of balance. And so I bring that up to show that just like you're talking about the deer being given to the king of Hawaii and fish being introduced that aren't natural, this is again a case of man introducing something into a very finely calibrated, intricate system of nature for whatever rationale man has that ultimately leads to the kinds of problems that we're talking about here, including the genetic modification of plants and animals. I've studied that extensively. I won't go into it because it's a long story, but it is not a pretty story. And you get, again, people like Bill Gates and others who are strictly, pirates, really, profiteers, who either don't look into this or don't want to know the truth and do know the truth. Like Rockefeller knows the truth of the fact that almost all of his medicines are formulas stolen from native populations around the world and then patented. And even though they sent researchers out to native populations all over the world who actually gave them their formulas out of the goodness of their heart, thinking they were going to help people, only later to realize they were patented and then being told they couldn't sell their own medicines and things like that. This is this is a perfect example of what we're talking about, why we have to wake up, clean up, grow up, and show up. And it's why I think, for me personally, I felt, because I addressed this with you right away in our conversations about jerky and my responsibility to having you on the podcast, so I didn't just send a whole bunch of people to buy something that was just going to create another imbalance. That was one of the first things I got into with you. But when you told me what was really going on, and I could see that what you're doing is very well thought out, very spiritually grounded, and not with the intention to overkill or overharvest, but that there's a multiple of these different types of situations. And like you said, I would much rather we eat this good food than watch it all die, because as soon as the deer run out of food, like you said, that's it. That's going to be a slow, painful death. That's like being in one of Hitler's prison camps and being starved to death. And people see pictures of that and it makes them sick to their stomach. So I think the fact that we can now take that imbalance and use it as a gift to help feed us, to wake up, so that we can then begin to have more spiritual, more responsible ways of farming. And I think all of these things we're talking about are great opportunities for a real education and a real opportunity for us to have more insight as to what's going on and the impact of human ingenuity, for better or worse, and that we have to take responsibility for the things that we cook up in our minds or cook up in our backyards, and really be more careful about what we introduce, so that we don't just keep creating more and more problems like this. Roundup is a great example of something cooked up, was meant to be a pipe cleaner, then said, oh, we can make an insecticide out of it. And now look at the devastation worldwide just from that one cooked up idea for profit.
And seeking the easy way. There's so many ways in which we as a species, and myself personally in my life, try to find the easy way. And, as you and I have talked about in the past, I found myself in prison for trying to take the easy way later, earlier
Right.
in my life. And so, what exists in the collective consciousness also can exist in us. And that line between good and evil is a line that cuts right through every man and woman's heart. And so, it's up to us to make those kinds of conscious choices, as you said. And, as it pertains to some of the animals and you mentioned the genetically modified animals, salmon in particular, you don't really even have to look too far to see how that impacts even the highest standard of meat that people commonly eat. So, right now, and I would say, as a caveat, I think there are obviously levels to this. So I'm not going to say that grass-fed, grass-finished regenerative beef is bad or anything like that. But the cows have been domesticated for so many thousands of years, they actually don't have a very refined palate. And the fact that they don't have a refined palate means that they don't have a diversity of plants that they actually need. And in fact, very few cows actually have the embodied wisdom, because they're just like humans, who become domesticated over time, where they lose the intuition of what they need, when they need it, what's in their environment. And I think Daniel Firth Griffith,
yes,
out in Virginia, he's doing amazing, incredible work with that. But unless you can find someone like that who's really kind of rewilding the cows in general, they tend to have almost a inability to find that diversity for themselves. And that very much shows up in the differences between axis deer and the nutrition and the lack of toxicity that's in a wild game animal versus even the best grass-fed, grass-finished beef that you might find.
Yeah, I think though there is a movement, I know, because Wild Pastures is a sponsor of my podcast. Autumn Smith and her husband are friends of my family's. And there is, and I've interviewed free range organic farmers and people like that. There is a real move towards an inclusive environment for animals where there is more diversity. There of course, there's now the rage of free range grass fed, but it's almost becoming an industrial movement. But behind that, there is the awareness by people that do understand everything we're talking about and are letting animals run wild in the wild, and kind of like Daniel Firth Griffith's cows do. And so I think, once again, it's a slow movement of awakening, and it's going to take podcasts like this and people with this level of awareness. And the question is, how sick does humanity have to get before they start asking the kinds of questions that we're talking about? And I have the fortunate experience of being a therapist. So people come to me sick, they come to me broken. And it takes someone with my level of skill and my holistic orientation to actually identify the root causes of these things. And the beauty of it is that, you know, the wounded healer is always the greatest healer because they have real experience of the process of healing. And so I think that the paradox of it is there's enough people that are finding Chek professionals and other holistically integrated thinkers that are coming with real health problems and finding out that the only pathway to health is to go back to real food and into nature and are tracking down the best food they can from the best farms they can. But, you know, there's going to come a tipping point where we have enough people that are awakened to this reality, but that now there's not enough supply. So the rush is, can we start creating a farming consciousness, a farming community? And I really believe the two groups of people on this planet that need to be deified as heroes and supported that way are school teachers that are really educating, such as Waldorf school teachers, and farmers that are really farming properly. They shouldn't be struggling like they are. That's two groups of people that hardly make enough money to get by on, but a good school teacher sets the foundation for a child's life, which has a huge impact on the planet and humanity. And a good farmer is the foundation for a child's life. And the nutrition has an impact on the function of their mind and their body and their creativity. And, you know, Carl Jung identified love and creativity as instincts. And what I know from working with people is the more unhealthy you get, the more detached you get from your instincts. And that's the same thing with feedlot animals. So our instincts to poop, our instincts to pee, our instincts to breathe, our instincts to move, our instincts to seek shelter, our instincts to procreate, the instinct for love, and the instinct for creativity. All creatures have to have those to survive. So the more unhealthy we get, the more detached we get from our instincts, and the more out of touch we get with our environment, because our instincts were developed by the environment to survive in the environment. So the instincts are actually the environment giving us the awareness of how to balance ourselves and how to interrelate in a diverse, biodiverse culture, in a biodiverse environment. So the point I'm making is when we eat well and we live well, our instincts are intact, our minds work, and then our instincts to love and be creative come online. But if we keep doing what we're doing, then we keep getting into situations where we keep worshiping people with white jackets and we keep worshiping daddy figures. And now what used to be the priest is the scientist. So the paradox is, if we don't wake up to the fact that nature is the book of knowledge and the book of life, and we keep going to laboratories and test tubes and genetic modifications, we're going to scientize ourselves right into an oblivion that's dangerously close. So I think it all really begins in the soil. And, you know, one of the things that I think is a unique perspective that I don't think many people have thought about, Mansal, and I'm going to bring it up with you. You know, I have the benefit of working with thousands of people and analyzing gut health and stool samples and biorhythms and hormone levels. And I've been doing this for a very, very long time. And I know that, it was that, for example, you have a lot of people. I've met many people that were my patients and even my own instructors. I remember two of my instructors, like me, were both gluten sensitive. They're highly competitive endurance athletes, triathletes, bike racers. And they went for a vacation to Ethiopia one year, and they were eating bread there that was from the original grains that had not been hybridized. And they were able to eat the bread with no negative reactions whatsoever. As soon as they come back to the United States and try to eat bread, they have terrible reactions. The point I'm driving at here is that I think that you are actually potentially producing medicinal food. Your deer jerky for me was not only like a spiritual moment, because I have not been able to eat red meat for as long as I can remember. Since I was in my 30s, it took till I was in my 30s and went through training with biohealth diagnostics and Dr. Bill Timmons in functional medicine to run tests on myself and realize why I was having all these problems, which were driving me crazy, because I was living as true as I could to all the things that I knew at the time, but I did not realize that I was eating animals that were eating gluten grains and were messing me up. And I didn't, there's a lot of things that I learned after I did all these tests on myself and learned how to do them on other people. And so to me, I see your jerky as a form of medicine to my body, because I haven't been able to eat organ meats for a long time, because how do you get organ meats that don't have grains in them? And so even though I have all this knowledge of glandulars and all this other stuff, I haven't been able to feed myself because it injures my body. So I think there's a real opportunity here for you to use the kinds of products that you're creating literally as medicine. I mean, Hippocrates said food should be man's first medicine. And I can't even imagine the number of children and the number of people out there that are suffering from all sorts of cognitive disorders and brain fog and back pain and arthritic pain. The number of people that came to me that were diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis or arthritis in general, that I was able to completely wipe it out by getting their diets right and getting them off of grains and just teaching them how to eat is uncountable. I mean, people would be completely shocked. They would say, oh, the doctor said I'll be on these drugs for the rest of my life, that I've got this arthritis, that it's genetic. I heard every damn medical excuse under the sun. So I'm just making the point that I think that what you're offering here is not just food, it's medicine. And there's tons of people out there that are probably eating a vegetarian diet, not because they want to, but because they're in a corner. And I know for me, like when I ate your jerky the first time, it felt like, wow, I felt the energy coming through me. I could taste the nutrition in the meat. It was just like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Like I said, I've got a lot of friends that are in the meat business or the jerky business, but I've never been able to actually enjoy it. I try it and see what my body does, and every single time it bites me. This was the first time I actually got to eat meat and enjoy the meat and feel good about it, and know after talking to you that I'm not only feeding myself, but I'm actually helping bring balance to the ecosystem of Hawaii. So I would just say for all of those out there listening, that if you're having a hard time finding food you can eat, and you've realized that a lot of the time when you are eating meat, it's causing you problems, it's probably what's in the meat, not to mention all the crap that they feed these animals. You and I already know that. I don't want to go down that. I've talked about it too many times, but I think really, Mansal, you're actually not only producing food, you're producing very important medicine.
Well, yeah, just hearing you say that, I notice a certain amount of pride in hearing that. And certainly that wasn't the conscious goal that I had. I, simply wanted to bring a wild and ethical kind of food to people at first. And you're absolutely right. It totally is medicine. And in fact, as I have started to hear back from many different people, their experiences and my own personal experience, I notice how true that is, because, some people will feel as though organ meats, eating them by themselves, they're just not a fan. Maybe they don't like the taste or whatever the case is. And so some people have to get a little adjusted. They taste it, and they might not be able to eat too much. So a lot of people have said that they only have a little bit. They don't eat too much because it's very rich. It's very intense. And then a few days later, they find themselves craving it in a way that they don't crave meat otherwise. And I suspect this has to do with our body's, intuition coming online and just recognizing how much nutrition is in these foods. And I live a relatively healthful life and have, a lot of great habits, but I will say the one thing that I really physically noticed was my sex drive went through the roof when I consistently ate the venison that had the organs in them. So there's something in the organs, something in all the vitamins and minerals that really did, increase at least my, sexual virility. But it is, I'm really grateful to hear that it has that impact on you. And we have on the packaging, let food be thy medicine, because it should be that way. It should be. And the irony here is that so many people today are buying liver supplements, organ supplements, and in many cases, if that's all you can get, that's great. That's helpful. But a single serving of the venison bites of the wild deer that we get from Hawaii, the organs that are in that serving are worth the equivalent of 2 servings of organ capsules. So you'd have to take 12 organ capsules in order to get the same amount of organ meats as a single serving of our venison bites. And so it is kind of ironic that you talk about the medicinal portion when you can literally replace, 100 pills in a week from taking this real food, supplement, so to speak.
It's the time of year when many of us refocus and recommit to lose weight, improve our fitness, and in general set new health goals for the coming year. The problem is that typically these resolutions don't last beyond the end of the month. And that's not because people lack information. Most people know what to do, but they struggle because they've become disconnected from their body's wisdom and from their own inner voice. And that's why Paul created Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1. Yes, you'll learn the fundamentals of breathing, eating, moving, sleeping, drinking, and thinking. These are the 6 Chek Foundation principles, which are guided by the 4 doctors, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Diet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Happiness. But more importantly, HLC1 is not just another course or program. It's a powerful immersion to help you get in harmony with your unique design. It's practical, it's experiential, and it's deeply transformational. So join us this March at the Rainbow House in Southern California for 3 days led by Angie Chek. If you're a coach, a practitioner, or someone simply ready to take ownership of your life and your health, this is your next step. Spaces are limited as we keep the group small so everyone gets personal attention. Visit paul.chekinstitute.com for more details and to claim your seat. That's paul.chekinstitute.com to sign up for Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1.
Well, the thing too is, and I've already investigated this because I've had this problem myself, you would be very hard pressed to find anyone that sells liver capsules, kidney, heart, any of that came from clean animals. So most people are going out and buying all this stuff. It's very expensive. Glandulars and organ meats are not cheap, not when you buy them in capsules because they're coming through some food company. And so they're going to, mark it up at least twice as expensive as it would be if you were to harvest it yourself, probably 3 or 4 times because of the cost of running a company and marketing. And so they're also very rarely are they organic or clean animals. So, remember, a liver is the system that removes toxins. So if you're eating the liver of a toxic animal, you're eating a high level of toxins. So people often have the right intention, but they don't realize that the so-called nutritious meat can't be any healthier than the animal that it came from. And the animal can't be any healthier than the soil that it's eating from, because the plants grow out of the soil. So, Adam Smith says the meat is a picture of the land it was raised on. And that is an absolute truth. And the fish is a picture of the water it lives in. So if we're eating meat from the land that's sick, we're eating sick meat. So you can have the right idea, but overlook the fact that the idea is wrapped in toxicity. And that's, again, what makes these axis deer so special. And because I was preparing for the podcast, I reached out to somebody who I have deep love and respect for, which is Fred Provenza, who is a highly regarded food scientist. He's author of many books, but one of them I think everyone should read is Nourishment. And he's done a lot of scientific experiments looking at the nutrient values of meat, comparing them to plants and comparing organ meats to muscle meat. So I asked him if he could share an overview of what he found. And so I'll share that with you because he was kind enough to provide it. And so I wanted to share it with everybody. So we're looking at organ meats versus muscle meats. He says vitamin B12 is very high, especially in liver, kidneys, and spleen. Iron's very high in liver, and vitamin A is very high. Let me see unfortunately, when Penny copied this over, my chart got screwed up. So let me scroll down here. So here we are. I've got it. So we're going to compare organ meats to muscle meats. So from vitamins, you've got organ meats very high, especially liver, muscle meats quite high. B12 high in kidneys and spleen. Iron very high in organs, particularly the liver, and muscle meats moderately high. Vitamin A very high in organ meats, especially the liver, moderately high in muscle meats, especially dark meat in poultry. Folate, high, especially in the liver, moderate in muscle meats. CoQ10, high, especially in the heart, low in muscle meats. Protein, high and of high quality, and all the essential amino acids. And then muscle meats, high and of high quality, all the essential amino acids. Fat content varies. Liver and heart are lean, while brain is high in fat. And then muscle meat varies greatly depending on the cut. And then there's also organ meats are a good source of selenium, zinc, magnesium, and choline. And muscle meats vary, but they are good sources of zinc and iron, and it depends on what cut. So just when you compare lean muscle meats, which is what most people live on, to organ meats, and there's much more of an analysis that's been done. And Autumn Smith, in my recent podcast with her, and one that I just listened to her that she did with, what's his name? Dr. I'll remember his name. He's a medical doctor. But anyhow, there's a man that's developed a new technology that uses light spectrometer, and they've identified what the frequencies of light emitted by the different nutrients in plants. And so they can tell you just by using a scanner, almost like you use at the store to check your food out, like a barcode scanner, it picks up the frequencies of light, which is exactly how they know the composition of stars, by the way. And it'll tell you by scanning meat exactly what the nutrition levels are. And they've got now the ability to scan over 1,000 metabolites, which are chemicals that are supportive of metabolism. And they're finding incredibly high amounts of nutrients that were only thought to be in plants in meat, and sometimes in higher concentrations in meat than they are in plants. And as I share in my nutrition training, the research I looked at showed that it takes about 6 pounds of vegetable matter for a cow to produce 1 pound of meat. So because animals are bioconcentrators, if you're eating high quality meats, you're actually, what the research is now showing is you're actually getting high quality concentrations of a lot of the plant nutrition that we didn't even realize was in meat before. So I think that when you start looking at some of the current research and the advanced technology that are still not commonly known about, it's changing our entire paradigm about how important meat is. But it's also reinforcing that the meat is a photograph of the land it lives on, and the fish is a photograph of the water it lives in, which brings us right back to square one. We better start taking care of the planet and the water and the sky instead of chemtrails and glyphosate and, billions and billions of tons of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and rodenticides, which just happens because you destroy the diversity of nature. In fact, I'll share something with you. I've got a book written by Sir Albert Howard, who is considered to be one of the greatest agriculturalists ever in England. It's called An Agricultural Testament. He did research years and years ago where he took plants of the same genus and he raised some on land that had no fertilizer on it, just planted seeds and just let them go. Basically, he put 4 plots of land together. I believe he might have used chemicals on one of the plots, and then he went all the way up to his own high-grade fertilizer. He tested, for example, he made fertilizer that was compost that was vegetarian and compost with meat scraps in it, as would typically have been done by native populations and by nature. Then what he did was he harvested parasites known to attack those plants. For example, a potato worm will eat potatoes. He took barrels and barrels of these parasites and poured them all over the plants when they had reached maturity on each of these fields and calculated how many of the plants were killed by the parasites. He showed that the soil that had nothing done to it fared better than the soil harvested with vegetarian compost, if I remember correctly. The plants that did the best were the ones that had compost raised with meat. The ones that did the worst, if I remember right, was the ones that had any kind of chemicals added to it. But he showed there was only a 3% crop loss of the plants that were raised with compost that had meat added to it. And that's better than any chemical corporation could ever even come close to with all their pesticides and related chemicals to so-called protect against the pests. So what he showed is that if you support Mother Nature's natural biodiversity and you feed the microorganisms of the soil, it produces robust plants with a healthy immune system. So, this is why I've spent so much time studying, because what I found is if you go back to prior to about 1950, science was authentically science. Scientists were actually in pursuit of the truth. They weren't bought out by corporations being paid to do pseudoscience to sell a truth that was really propaganda for profit. And having spent years and years analyzing scientific investigations and all these things, one of the things you see for sure is once you get to around 1950 and earlier, it was people like Sir Albert Howard, Aaron Fried Pfeiffer, and many others that I can mention, Fred Sykes, Lady Eve Balfour, Dr. Sir Robert McCarrison, who was tasked by the British military to investigate this stuff due to the fact that they had so many health problems with young soldiers coming in. And he investigated the Hunza of India, on and on it goes. But you see, we have lost real science because we have a scientific establishment that's protecting the dogma to protect corporations. And, all you got to do is look at the wireless bullshit to see how much of a scam is going on there. So I think that, what we're uncovering here are some very, very deep and profound truths. But ultimately, what we're saying is that you've provided a food source that is very nutritious, very healthy, and that when you buy it, you've already reassured me that the animals are all being killed ethically. And I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about, aside from what we've talked about so far is that you're actually doing a very good thing because, I grew up in a hunting community. When I was a young man, I used to skin animals at a butcher shop. A buddy of mine, his father owned a butcher shop. So during hunting season, I could make money because they had such an inflow of animals from all the hunters. They needed help skinning and dressing these animals. And a lot of these hunters don't even take the organs in. They just cut the insides of the animal out and just dump it in the forest and bring the muscle meats in. And so what you're doing is working with hunters that are actually harvesting, well, pretty much the whole animal, aren't they?
Yeah, that's the point. We have it's a weird dynamic that we have found ourselves in as a species where the muscle meat is the prized for taste and palatability, and the highest nutrient density parts, the organs, are oftentimes left in the field for vultures and other scavengers. And so we are bringing these hunters who are, hunting these animals with USDA certifications. They go at night, they take a shot in the head. It's a quick, clean kill on the animals. They literally lose their license if they don't get a headshot, if they don't get all headshots. And so it's very, very, regimented and controlled. But instead of leaving these organs, they can bring them back. And now they have a way that they can actually generate some more revenue. So back to your point about farmers needing to make more money and teachers needing to make more, we get to support these farmers more. And what I think is really special in Real Provisions is we provide information to the consumer right on the page about the people who are taking part in the hunt. So Desmond is one of the ones in Hawaii who goes out. He's the one hunting at night. He says his prayers and he does his breath work before he goes out. It's a very intentional daily routine before he goes and hunts. And then he brings back all of those organ meats. And, you had mentioned some of these tools that people have now to identify the nutrient value, and especially some of what are called phytonutrients. So these are some of the nutrients that come directly from the plants. We've actually worked with Utah State with this axis deer to do direct side-by-side comparisons. And what we found was quite astounding to me. Of course, I expected there to be more nutrition in the venison, but we found 5 times more vitamin A and E in the axis liver than in grass-fed beef. So
that's
we're
impressive.
comparing this to the grass-fed, right? There's more choline, more vitamin B1, B3, omega-3 fatty acids, 8 times more than grass-fed beef, 64 times more than grain-fed beef.
Wow.
More stearic acid, and I'll keep one more specific indicator here. Tryptophan betaine, so it's a very specific type of tryptophan. It's a phytonutrient that comes from these animals. So these animals are so wise. And when you give them sovereignty and freedom, they know the best grasses, the best flowers, best time of day to eat them. Because as you probably know, the nectar in the flowers changes throughout the course of the day. They have their own circadian rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
The animals know when to eat these for the optimal nutrition. 100 times more tryptophan betaine in axis deer than in beef. And it's because they have this sovereignty. So we know that there's, all kinds of good stuff. And I'm happy to go, more into the other side too. We know all the bad stuff that's not in the axis deer as well, all the toxins that are not present.
That's critical.
Because that is a huge issue in today's food system.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I wanted to bring up, you and I have talked about this privately. I'm going to cite back this amazing book, The Living Soil and the Holly Experiment by Lady Eve Balfour, who is one of the originators of the organic movement and the whole concept of organic farming. And I believe the first edition of that book was 1946. I read that book, I don't know, 30 years ago, and it blew my mind. It became one of the books that really inspired me to create my nutrition and lifestyle coaching branch of the Chek Institute. But she talks about schools in different regions of the world that realized that through medical examinations that the kids were unhealthy, and they tracked it right back to the food. Now, this is pretty amazing because this was like in the 40s, and they were identifying that kids were getting sick because the quality of the food and the nutrition of the food was too low. And several private schools decided to start their own organic farms. And she cites a private school in New Zealand, and I can't remember, but I've been right in the suburb of Auckland where this school was at. And as soon as because I knew the name of it from the book, I went, oh my God, this is right where this story comes from. And she talks about how the same thing, the school doctors had recognized all these problems, and one thing led to another. They started their own organic farm. And what was real interesting is that the doctor had been monitoring all the injuries from contact sports, particularly rugby, because that's the sport of New Zealand. But he found once the kids started eating organically raised produce and meats, that their ligaments and their tendons and their joints got much more resilient. And the other thing that they did was they found that when they switched to all organic food, the kids went through a period usually of about 2 weeks of detoxification. And oftentimes the kids' parents thought the child was getting sick because they would get a runny nose and flu-like symptoms. So they began warning all the incoming children that were new to the school and letting the parents know that it was normal to have a period of detoxification, because once you start eating nutritious food like this axis deer, you're giving your body the resources to begin to run the liver pathways that start breaking down chemicals that the body can't break down. When the body can't break chemicals down, for example, most of your pesticides are fat soluble. So if you don't have the nutrition on board to break it down and convert it to a water soluble chemical that you can pee or poop out, it'll shuttle it off into fat, which is one of the most common reasons we have so much obesity is people are just toxic, and the body's trying to protect the brain and the organs and the glands from the toxins. So it just produces fat to store it in. And so basically the kids would go through a period of a couple of weeks of sort of basically what's called a Hexheimer reaction or a healing reaction. And then they would become very vital, and their brains would work, their bodies would work better, and they had a lot of positive things. So I just wanted to bring that up because if people start eating like I did, when I got your jerky, I was like, oh my God, it was just like I was getting high off this stuff. And you reminded me in an email or something, well, don't forget you're eating pretty high dose of organ meats. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I mean, it didn't cause me problems per se, but I just, you were mentioning to me how rich it was, and that maybe because I was asking you roughly how much am I getting if a comparison to the wet weight of the meat for the jerky, because I was trying to figure out how much venison am I actually eating if I eat a bag of this stuff a day. And you're reminding me that you're eating a very concentrated dose of nutrition. Which, my kids, as soon as they walk in the door, they go, Dad, can I have some of that deer jerky? They love it. They just absolutely love it. And I've even let them try other jerkies. And they say, I like the taste of this one better, which is yours. And so they actually love the flavor and they like the organs. But I just think it's a good thing for the listeners to hear if you start using the axis deer venison bites, that you could go through a period of detoxification and not to actually make the mistake of thinking that the meat's making you sick. It's actually cleaning you out. Any thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, I think there is an adjustment period that everyone has to incorporate into bringing these products into their diet. So for your reference, a bag is 1.5 pounds of meat. So if you eat a whole bag, you're eating 1.5 pounds of wild venison in a single setting. But the equivalent of that in just the organs, for example, is literally you are having 8 servings of organ meats in a single day.
Perfect.
And
I'll take
and
it.
so it is great. And also your body can definitely, just like, I don't drink a lot of caffeine, but when I do, I can feel really energized.
Yeah.
And if I drink too much, well, that's also not as
Fun.
great for my body, but it's something to keep in mind, like pace yourself.
Yeah.
And so my invitation really for people is to pace themselves when they're eating it, treat it like medicine, which you've brought up earlier. And especially for kids, there seems to be some type of intuition with children that I'm really learning to trust and really excited to trust more and more, because I'll notice many people who buy this have multiple children. And in some of the cases, one child, like the youngest child, will absolutely love it and cannot get enough of it. And I'm just thinking about this on this call, but if you think about, mothers who are giving birth to children,
They get
especially
depleted.
if they're super depleted,
Yeah.
especially if they're doing it anytime less than 3 years apart.
Yeah.
They're going to have second, third, fourth children that their body just doesn't have the nutrition.
No.
And so what I'm noticing is that the youngest kids
Yeah.
are obsessed with the venison and the organs in particular. And I would not be surprised if their intuition is just calling them like, you need this nutrition, you need this nutrition. And so, yeah, I'm really excited that people have to, we get to like follow the children's intuition in those ways. Because most people who buy these products are definitely open to that, trusting the intuition of their children. So I haven't personally had anybody who's had a negative, reaction, but certainly pace yourself. This is potent.
Yeah. No, what you're calling intuition is really instinct. That's the instincts coming back on. The instinct, to eat what you need and to smell that smell. Like my kids like the flavor and the smell of your jerky because it's so rich. It's like, because I was raised on a farm and I have a lot of knowledge of the soil, I can tell right away when I'm eating a piece of meat of any kind what the soil was like. There's a distinct flavor which I grew up with. And the richer the soil is, the more of an animal taste the meat often has. It has a real depth of flavor to it. And, you eat beef today, even high quality, what they would call high quality cuts of beef, or I don't eat beef because I have an allergy to it, but in any of the meats, you eat them and they just taste like flesh. They don't taste like earth. They don't taste like life. They just taste like flesh. And I think I was telling you once, I was lecturing in Seattle, Washington, and one of my students that lives there said, Paul, there's a restaurant here that specializes only in wild game. Would you like to come to it? And this is after I realized I couldn't eat pretty much any red meat, but they had raw elk steak there. And I ate probably a pound of this elk steak, and it was unfriggin' believable. I literally, Mansal, could cut it with a fork. I did not need a knife. And the flavor in that meat was just like fireworks going off in my head. It was just like, wow, this is just real food. But there's a wild animal that's been hunted and that I got to eat, and I could taste the flavor of the earth under its feet in the meat. And I think that's, when someone eats your venison jerky, they'll get to experience that. And it sort of wakes the senses up to the fact that, like Autumn Smith, the meat is a photocopy of the land. It's really bringing you the land right to you. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, because a lot of people just aren't really hip to it, I think it's really important to make sure you remember, if you're eating jerky meats, it's a good idea to drink more water because it is dried meat. And so in order to digest it properly, your body's going to have to suck water out of the body itself to break it down if you aren't bringing water in with it. Have you come to any sort of a formula or suggestion for how much to increase water intake with meat, or just should people just be aware of that and drink more water?
Well, one of the philosophies that I've tried to move towards more lately in my life, which doesn't directly answer your question, but I think could prove valuable, is simply incorporating as much structured water into my life as I possibly can. And so, I drink pretty much every day a certain amount of coconut water, a certain amount of juice, even a certain amount of fruits, eating fruits like cantaloupe is in season right now. We had an amazing apple harvest. It's apple season right now. We literally have gone through, my wife and I have gone through maybe close to 10 pounds of apples in the last couple of weeks. And so
Good.
Trying to get as much moisture from the food that we eat, the other foods that we eat, is really my biggest priority. And that's not to say I don't like water. We actually go and I have a natural spring that we go and pick up all of our water in big glass bottles. I bring it home, and then I use ozone to treat the water myself, clean it. But personally, I think what you're saying is accurate. And so especially for people who are traveling, if you're going to be traveling and using this, because that's the best use case for me, right?
Yeah.
When we're at home, I love cooking. I'm going to cook, fresh food. Maybe I'll have a little bit here and there if I want to graze and just get a little bit of nutrition. But when I'm traveling, and this is like a main source of protein, I have to really be conscientious to get the fruits and the liquid that I need, because traveling can be dehydrating. Going to climates like, the Rocky Mountains, and that can be really, lose a lot of moisture. And so, yeah, without necessarily having any specifics, I think if you can combine it with eating a lot of fruits and structured water, it's going to be advantageous for sure.
Well, you'll know you're not getting enough water because you'll get a little bit constipated. That's exactly how you'll know, or you'll have stools that are just hard to pass, which is never fun. But, it's the same with any dehydrated foods, no matter whether it's plant or animal. That's just a kind of a general rule. But I think it's just important for people to know. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I know a lot of my friends and a lot of the athletes that I know, their athletes are hungry people because they train, right? So the scenario of me eating a whole bag in one day is not going to be unusual at all. And I noticed after, I noticed it probably after the first bag I ate that I got a little bit constipated. I went, I ate too much venison jerky. It was too dry and I didn't drink enough water.
You ate 1.5 pounds of meat.
Yeah. Well, my
day.
body was digging it, man. I was like, oh my God. It was like, like when a cow hasn't got enough salt and you put a salt lick out, they'll go crazy with that salt lick because their body's craving it, So I was having my metaphorical salt lick. And so I wanted to ask you, what is the current, two things. What is the storage capacity? How long can the venison bites last? Because, for example, if I want to put some in my cellar for emergency storage, what's the shelf life on a bag of the venison bites?
Right now, we have a shelf life of 6 months, and we feel confident about a year, but obviously we want to be conservative until we verify with our own testing. So just for people who are curious, I'll go a little bit deeper than just answering your question. So a few things. When you buy jerky that's at the store, one of the Archer brands or Epic Provisions or whatever the case is, oftentimes they want to keep it moist. The jerky, the meat sticks, whatever the case is, they want to keep it moist because I get for many reasons, but one is that people like people like the flavor more. And what they do, unfortunately, is they use celery powder and some of those other kinds of ingredients that can be carcinogenic, unfortunately. But more importantly, they leave a lot of moisture in the product. So a few things with ours that are different. We use vinegar as our kill step. So vinegar can kill bacteria, and that's what's called like a kill step. And then we make sure that the water activity in any product is below what would be considered shelf stable by a pretty considerable amount. And that allows us to have literally 5 ingredients. Right. So it's axis deer, liver, heart, salt, and vinegar. That's it. There's no fillers. There's no other ingredients, additives, all kinds of things that you might find, soy, liquid smoke, all these kinds of things, celery powder, etc. And so I'm really proud of that kind of purist element.
I am too. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it also allows it to last a really considerable amount of time. And just to give, your audience a frame of reference, it didn't used to be this way. Native American people had something called pemmican, and they had their own jerky. They literally just used the sun
and smoke
when they killed an animal, when there was an abundance of meat, and they preserved that meat without any celery powder, without any kind of preservatives. They did that for thousands and thousands of years.
And salt.
Yeah. And so we're utilizing a very old but very simple method. I can't take any credit. I have so much gratitude to the industrious people of our ancestors who thought of all these super nutrient dense ways. And I just am hopeful that there's enough people who want no compromises and are willing to make that commitment.
If it's my podcast, so the majority of the people listening, if they're listening to my podcast, they're pretty hip because I'm talking about stuff like this all the time. What's your range of distribution? Is this only in the United States at this time, or how far away can you ship it?
Right now, it's only in the United States to direct people. However, anybody who is outside of the country, feel free to reach out. I know a lot of people who have reached out, in the past for things are maybe kind of like hubs themselves. Maybe they have like a nutrition, like a gym in a different country or something like that. And I'm happy to just one-off have a relationship where maybe I send 100 to you at some point and, you can do whatever you'd like. But there are definitely regulations that we have to, work through as far as sending meat is concerned.
Yeah, I was going to say customs might have a something to say.
Yeah, exactly. And especially with the world the way that it is today in terms of trade and all that kind of stuff. But I don't want anybody to feel like this is totally out of reach. Just feel free to reach out to me. I brought up with the story of my mother. I just want to feed people, and it brings me a lot of joy and happiness to be able to do so. So if you are in Denmark and you reach out and say, hey, I got a family and I have a gym and I would love to, put this for my athletes, we'll find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, fantastic. What is the cost of a bag of venison bites, just so people can have a kind of a sense of what the investment is?
Yeah, so it's anywhere between $20 to $30 per pack, and depending on if you get a subscription. So if you feel like you're for sure going to use it regularly, obviously be on a subscription, you'll get a much discounted rate. And I think a lot of people understandably have a moment of whoa, that's maybe a little bit on the pricier side compared to something you can find at the grocery store, for example. And we've talked a lot about the differences.
There's no comparison. I mean, shit.
There really is no comparison, but there's one thing in particular that I always like to leave people with. And that is specifically around the fact that, one, the amount of protein per bag is 58 grams. Mm-hmm. Compared to many other, even beef jerky products, it is significantly cheaper for the protein. So if you look on just a per gram of protein basis, it's
Yeah.
cheaper than anything you can find in the grocery store. And that was intentional. Like, I wanted to make sure that it was accessible for people. And then the second thing is, let's say I was just doing some research this morning, any kind of liver capsules, organ meat
Yeah.
supplements you're going to buy, you're going to spend 40 to maybe 75,
60 plus,
$100 on organ meats for a month-long supply.
Yeah.
And you can totally replace that with this product. Literally, if you got 4 bags and you had it every other day, you're getting 2 servings. It's literally 1 serving a day of organs. And it is way more absorbable from the perspective of not having to go through all these capsules and gelatin through your digestive tract.
Yeah.
It's higher nutrient density liver. So there's price and then there's value.
Absolutely.
And the price is high because the value is enormous.
Yes. And what do you define as a serving? How much of the jerky constitutes a serving and how many servings are in a bag?
So there's 1 ounce is a serving, and there's 4 servings in a bag. So 4 ounces per bag, and you get an ounce as a serving. And like you mentioned, something like 16 grams of protein per serving. You can just crush the whole bag like you do and get 60 grams of protein.
Yeah.
But it's, very high, both protein density and nutrient density as well.
Right. So the point that I'm driving at is for a lot of people, you could get quite a significant nutritional enhancement, even if you only ate 1 serving a day, just as a medicinal application, say for children or something like that.
The irony is, when I first created this, I looked at my own habits from the past and how I would consume jerky. And I thought, this will be great when I go on a trip, for example, and I don't want to eat anything that's in the restaurants at the airports. I'll just have a whole bag of jerky, and that'll be kind of my protein for the entire day. And what I realized when I got the bites is that's a lot. Not only of jerky, but it's like a lot of organs and nutrition. And so I don't actually need that much. So I would say, yes, most people, if you're one of those people like me, 190 pounds, fairly strong, very active, I usually take serving sizes and I kind of scoff and say, I'll eat 4 of those every time I try this. But I'm really wanting to press the point that this is so nutrient dense. Even 1 serving, 1 ounce is just a great snack to kind of tide you over, but give you a lot of nutrients.
And it does have a real richness and a depth of satiety that you don't get with the standard jerky meats due to the organs and the quality of the fats. I find that the brain senses satiation because of the nutrition in it. I know, for example, in the past, I've eaten various things like turkey jerky or various other things. It's like I can just eat it forever. It's just, it's not filling me up. It's like I stay hungry. But I found with your stuff that the richness of it is I reach a point where I just feel like I don't need any more. My body says that's enough. I think the reason that I was eating so much of it is because my body was just really hungry for the nutrition. Typically what I do is Penny often doesn't cook dinner. Penny and Angie often don't get to cooking dinner until usually about 7 at night. I typically am eating lunch in the middle of the day, and then I'm finishing work around 5:30. I get up at 3:30 in the morning. So by the time I get out of here, I've had a long day. But I'm often so damn hungry, I find that if I don't eat something, that I have a hard time making it to dinner. And the next thing you know, I'm looking around the house for, whatever the best pretzels I can find. Like we have cauliflower pretzels and stuff like that. But my body, even the best of that stuff, my body reacts to it. So since I got your venison jerky, I've just been going and grabbing some jerky. I'll just take a little handful and stick it in the pocket of my jacket. And then I'll just nibble on it while I'm walking around so that it kind of helps me skip over eating even what I would call good junk. And then I actually get to dinner. And I also feel that I don't need to eat as much dinner, which for me is important because I typically head for bed around 8:30. And when we're eating at 7 at night, I found that I wake up a lot more tired. If I get to dinner and I'm really hungry, I want to eat more, but then the quality of my sleep isn't as good because my organs and digestive system are working all through the night, so it doesn't get any rest. So by eating some jerky right after work, I don't have to eat as much dinner, and then I sleep better. So I found that to be a helpful approach.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's great for me to hear all these different use cases. As a somewhat humorous aside, I would highly recommend you be mindful if you have these jerky bites in your pocket when you're walking around, because my dogs and my cats are absolute psychopaths whenever they
I've already
smell it.
experienced that.
I've had a picture, she just completely ripped open a bag and ate everything in it.
As soon as I walk out the door, they head right for my pocket. And I'm like, no, that's mine. You got your food over there. But yeah, I have already, we have 2 dogs. And as soon as I walked out the door, they come running over and they're like wagging their tail like they think it's a treat for them. They're like, we've been good. We've been good.
And what's funny is I make this kind of joke, but there's actually a lot of products on the market that are made with organs because it's this thing that not that many people have historically wanted. And also, the quality oftentimes of these animals is not very high and there's plenty of toxins, et cetera. But they use that to make a lot of the
animal food,
dog treats and things like that. And great. I'm glad the dogs and cats get that nutrition, but that should be the best nutrition that we eat, especially from the kind of highest caliber of animals. So I noticed on some of the Facebook comments, someone said, this is dog food. And I said, well, actually, it's higher quality food than most people eat. If that's dog food, then...
Well, I don't know if you know this, but the standards for animal food and pet food are higher than they are for human beings. I've looked into this. They actually have tighter restrictions on what they can put into that food and nutritional values than there is for human food. It's a kind of a weird paradox. And veterinary medicine has higher standards for medicine than human medicine. And it's actually harder to become a vet than it is to become a medical doctor for humans.
Yeah, we live in some backwards times, but I'm glad that we can, help support and supply and inform people. And I'm still on a path of learning myself. And
well, I am too every day.
Yeah,
I love it.
Trying. I do too. And especially there's layers to this. And once I've found that I've gone through the meat layer and I feel really good about all the wild nutrient dense food, there's all kinds of layers around seasonality and locality, the mitochondria that are communicating between the soil where I live and the produce that I eat, and all of the fruiting bodies that are from a certain time period of the year. So yeah, I obviously I'm very convicted about this, and I feel as though I've found and want to share something that's really meaningful. And at the same time, there's so much I have to learn, so I don't want to sound like a know-it-all at all. There's much for all of us to continue to navigate and grow from.
Well, I think we start learning a lot as soon as we eat really nutritious food. Our body starts teaching us, and we start waking up, and all of a sudden we realize a lot of the things that we wish we'd have realized years ago, because if we would have realized it then, we might have saved ourselves a lot of doctor's visits and health challenges. And so, my dream for the podcast was to help bring an awareness to an option for people that, I tested thoroughly before I would do the podcast and asked you a lot of questions, because I have all the same concerns that you do. And I'm also grounded in a deep spirituality that I take my responsibility seriously as an educator and as a therapist. And so, I don't share anything on my podcast that I haven't looked into very, very carefully, because I don't want to mislead people. I don't want to contribute to the disease that has the planet. If I wanted to just make money, the number of products that I've turned down from companies that want to sponsor my podcast that I could make tons of money off of is a lot. I could probably be making 3 times as much a year off my podcast as I do, because I won't sell stuff to people that I don't. If my rule is, if my kids don't get it, I'm not going to sell it on the podcast, as a general theme. And so, is there a purchase code or anything for people to use? How do they get the jerky?
Yeah. So, I mean, to your last point, I'll just address that. I've always appreciated and really trust your commitment. I know we've had lots of conversations offline and almost via friends and connections and things. So, there's a reason why so many people love and trust you, and that's due to your integrity. And I feel really appreciative that you see in this creation a lot of integrity as well. And I hope people
100%.
who are listening, thank you. And I hope people who are listening, realize that, yes, this is a business, and yes, we sell something, but really, like, this is a deeply nourishing gift that I like to share.
I've already bought 50 bags. I'm a good customer.
You absolutely are. And I do genuinely, all thanks to God for bringing all of this together, and I feel very grateful. So, yeah, if people would like to try these, they can visit the website realprovisions.com, and the venison bites, the venison organ and jerky bites are available. If you spend over $100, you will get free shipping, and you will also get a free bag of our venison chips, our meat that have a really satisfying crunch to them. So really, really tasty. And for some of those kiddos who might not want the organs, this is another great way to, as my friend Amy says, like, sneak some protein in. And just use the code Chek, CHEK, at realprovisions.com, and you will get that special offer.
Awesome. Well, it'll be the best $100+ you spent on yourself in a very long time, I can assure you, because I've done it several times. Penny says, if you're going to buy this much jerky, you might want to get some stock in this company. Like, well, let's work on that. But yeah, no. It's a great blessing. Thank you, Mansal. I really love what you do. And, I really enjoyed our first podcast together, which, for all of you that want to know more about sacred hunting, you can go back to our first podcast, which was 3 years ago. And so I'd love to hear your feedback on the venison bites. And when, Mansal, do you have any idea when you're going to have other products coming up that you've been talking about? Like, about when in the future will we be able to talk about your new products and sell them and eat them?
Yeah. So as of, when this podcast comes out, we should have the venison bites and the venison chips in very short order. We're going to have our wild river bites. So these are from those carp fish that are in all the Midwest waterways. We've done all the studies on them to check for glyphosate and pesticides and everything. And it's actually a Korean barbecue. But we do it with literally spices, honey, and the fish. They're delicious for people who, want a little bit more flavor. And we also have some tinned shad that's coming out, soon as well. And for people who just cannot get enough of the organs, we're going to have the Axis liver crisps. So these are just liver.
Perfect.
Straight. For people who want to buy those. So what I would really suggest people who are listening, grab the venison bites, because those we have on,
on hand,
on hand, regularly, but make sure you follow along, because one of our core values is following and listening to nature. And that means that we will have a drop of a product that's seasonal, that is super nutrient dense, but we're not going to have it in stock the whole year, because nature doesn't want want that, it's not valuable to, do that. And so, yes, it's a really unique way for us to both honor nature she's giving us and also make sure that it gets into people's hands. But obviously, things move quickly, as does nature in this kind of highly connected world.
Yeah. Now, will the same code work, and will you give the same $100 plus purchase discount for the newer products as well?
Yep. The code Chek will work for any of the products. Obviously, it's over $100 purchase, and the venison bites are kind of the flagship that has both the high protein and high organ meats and things. But over time, if you find that you really love the fish, or pescatarian, or you really love just the liver, you just want the nutrients from the liver, then you're more than welcome to utilize that.
And because it has such a long shelf life, and it's seasonal, there's nothing wrong with stockpiling it. I mean, I like I said, I bought 50 bags off you, and I got, 20, 25 or 26 of them left. And my goal is to always keep some on hand just for emergency food, or for traveling, or for, taking the kids on outings or whatever. So that's something for everyone to consider, because if you like it, and you want to have it around, it does have a long shelf life. So you can take advantage of it and get some, so that you don't have to do what I did and run out. And because I remember the first time I ran it, you said you were out for a while. You were in the middle of 2 batches. I'm like, oh shit, I missed the deadline. So I was real happy when the next batch showed up.
Yeah, that first batch we sold out in 36 hours, and it is relatively common for us. So we're a little bit further along now, so we feel good about having it with regularity. But again, definitely, if you want to make sure that we have it, subscribe. And this is not something that we feel as though we're going to have any trouble, selling. It's more the limits that are given to us by nature in terms of how many animals we can hunt and kill and things. And so, I feel really blessed. This started off, I wanted all of my friends, people I knew kind of on a first name basis, to be able to come and order this to have for their families, and to buy in bulk, buy 20, 30, 50 at a time, have it for your families. And that's really the intention. And if it's a little more of an extended family now, among, Chek listeners and, people like that, then I feel, really great about that. But at the moment, we really don't plan on going in grocery stores or anything like that, because we don't need to.
I don't think it's
direct.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. Why bother? It just causes more cost to it. And the people that are going to buy it from you directly are the kind of people that are probably going to be the ones making the changes in the world and supporting the farmers and doing the kinds of things that we need to do. So they're the kind of people that go to a stream to get water instead of to the store to get bottled garbage. But hey, Mansal, thank you, man. What an awesome podcast. I had such a great time, and you just gave me another opportunity to remind people of some of these amazing old books and studies. And I just absolutely love the podcast, because I get to meet and talk to and make friends with such amazing people like you. And thanks for all the love you're pouring into the world, and all the consciousness you're raising out there. And my friends that, that we share all just love you and have nothing but amazing things to say. And I think you're doing so much great stuff out there. And I look forward to our next podcast. Maybe when you have something new and interesting to offer, then let's talk about it.
I'm looking forward to it, Paul. Anytime we could have a conversation is an exciting time. And luckily, we can record it and share it with other people as well.
Yes. Well, thanks to all of you. And thank you to the sponsors of the podcast for your amazing products. We remind you that whenever you buy anything from our sponsors, you're actually putting money in the hands of biodynamic, organic, and free-range farmers, because they don't sell anything that doesn't meet my values, or they wouldn't be a sponsor of the podcast. So you're taking care of Mother Earth, you're taking care of the companies that make great food for us and products for us, and you're taking care of yourself, and a little goes to the podcast, so I can afford to spend my time finding great people like Mansal and great products and great minds to share with you. And thanks to all of you for being the change the world needs now. I will say we are safe, we are home, we are whole. Aho, Great Spirit. It is done, it is done, it is done. See you next time. Try to bring you something awesome. And Mansal, once again, thank you for all your love, buddy.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Aho, bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, Mansal Denton. If you'd like to try Real Provisions Wild Axis Deer Jerky, plus get a free bag of venison chips and free shipping, go to realprovisions.com/Chek and use the code Chek on checkout. That's realprovisions.com/CHEK and use the code Chek, CHEK on checkout. Connect with Mansal on Instagram at Real Provisions and at Mansal Denton, and also the Sacred Hunting Instagram at Sacred Hunting. For more interaction with Paul and to share ideas and ask questions about topics discussed in this podcast, we invite you to join his Spirit Gym program and community. You can participate in live Q&A sessions with Paul and his podcast guests, access the members forum within the Spirit Gym community where you can chat with other members, attend weekly virtual meetups with Paul, and study his comprehensive Master Key online program. Explore the options and subscribe today by going to myspiritgym.com. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the show on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.